People out there in the dark watching. Does that ever freak you out?
Out in the dark?
No. People knowing that people out there are watching you right now.
Oh, out there right now?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, is this being streamed like live?
No, it's just whenever anybody watches a video that people are watching you. China, the government,
That could be.
other people.
That could be.
Anyway, very special guest, Tyler Schweigert with Dixon and Company. Is it Dixon and Company or Dixon Company Wealth Management?
Full name is Dixon and Company Wealth Management.
See, that's good.
Yeah.
Special guest today, Tyler Schweigert with Dixon and Company Wealth Management, host of the Financial Edge podcast. So it's cool to have somebody else, fellow podcast person, on our podcast, which continues to remain nameless until this day. Still is nameless.
Oh,
We don't have a
That was
name.
supposed to be the reveal.
Yeah, no. No, I want to just see where it goes. It's like a child, It's like I want to give it a week, before I give it a name. Make sure that it's the right name,
Pure.
Pure, a podcast, a media podcast.
Pure
But
media.
no, we're covering just the financial business, the business end of creative professionalism, really,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel there's a huge kind of hole there, really, because there's how to do business and there's how to do financials, and then there's how to be creative, but rarely do those two kind of overlap, which is why, and I think you end up with kind of the starving artist type of things where people, creative types, depending on where you are in the artistic spectrum, you almost see money as this like dirty thing. Like, why would I sell my artwork? And you end up with like undervaluing, or if you're trying to start a venture,
Right.
where you're doing wedding films or photos or whatever, or if even just illustration, any kind of creative discipline, you're like, well, what do I charge?
Exactly.
What am I worth? Why is my phone going off? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out, I think, for anybody starting out business or getting into any field. I don't think it's just even the creative side. I think it's anybody trying to figure out what they're trying to do. I mean, I've had several clients where when they start their business, not most of my clients is interesting. When we started doing our financial coaching, a lot of the clients that we took on were actually people that were working a W-2 job. And I think, especially knowing my own self, where I am far more security driven than I am willing to take a risk. Whereas I think when you and I have talked, I think it's easier when you come from a family maybe of entrepreneurs or people that have owned business. It's a whole lot easier to know, hey, all right, I can make this happen, or have the confidence, probably is a better way to say that I can make this happen because you've seen it your whole life. Whereas somebody that's like me, where I'm more used to a W-2 lifestyle, and I grew up, I always had an attraction to business. I always saw the benefit of, man, if I can charge what I'm worth. But when you go into the W-2 world, again, sometimes it can get a little comfortable, where you're like, all right, I have the consistency of a paycheck. I've got this money coming in, but I've got somebody else telling me how much I'm worth. And I remember, it's a season where, I busted tail for, years trying to increase my earning ability. But I just remember at that point in time, you can work hard for a whole year for a 2% increase. And if you worked even harder, you might get a 3% increase. And that difference of the 2% to a 3%, after you back out taxes and everything else, I think when I did the math, it was around $20 every 2 weeks.
Ouch.
So, trying to figure out then moving into the entrepreneur space of how do I know how much I'm worth? Well, it's a little bit of a different game versus somebody else telling you how much you're worth.
Right.
So, I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you went down that road, because I was going to ask kind of what helped you make the shift, because you were in, like you were saying, the W-2 lifestyle. You were in the corporate and a big corporation. It was a Fortune 500?
Yep, Fortune 500 company.
Side tangent, pin in that one.
Sure.
You're with the Fortune 500. What's the difference between restarting my timer? What's the difference between a Fortune 500 and there's like a Fortune 100? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's really just the size of the company based off of their market cap. So, for example, if you're a Fortune 500 company, you're one of the top 500 largest companies in the United States.
Oh, okay.
Fortune 100 companies just means you're in the top 100.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't know where that company fell at that I worked for, but I mean they're big.
But they were up there.
Yeah. If I said the name, anybody
Right.
would know who they are.
Right.
Clearly, would know who they are.
Let's just say that it's a company we've all heard of,
Yeah.
but that's irrelevant. What's more is like you doing the math and seeing that shift and kind of understanding from a corporate standpoint of going, hey, wait a second, like this doesn't make sense for the amount of effort I'm putting in versus the amount of return I'm getting. Yes, it's consistent, but there's and there's not even a glass ceiling there. It's just it's a slog, really.
Yeah. So I'll back up actually into my first experience, which had nothing to do with any Fortune 500 company. It was when I was 14 or 15 years old. I remember the day I turned 15, I went and I got a job working for, you can edit this out if we can't do company names, but the day I turned 15, I went and got a job working for Dairy Queen.
Okay.
So your picture in the back is very apropos. It's, the ice cream, because I was a professional ice cream sculptor, I think was the title.
I love that.
But I was the front till person, I'd like take your orders and things like that. But leading up to that point, when I was younger, my parents lent me their lawnmower and I'd just go start mowing lawns. Now, when you're living at home, 12, 13, 14 years old, you don't really have, you're trying to earn money for, video games.
Right.
Right? Or to be able to go out to the movies with your friends. Or, I don't know, to go do something. To have freedom. I mean, until you get your license, I feel like having a paycheck is, your first stage of freedom.
Right.
Where I can spend money that nobody else has claimed to because I earned it. To some degree.
Right.
Because my parents were still telling me to save.
Right.
So, but I remember when I went and got that job working for Dairy Queen, I think I started out at $5.15 an hour.
Yeah, buddy.
And I was fired up out of my mind. Okay, I can, I just have to trade hours for dollars.
Right.
No problem. And so I busted tail. I would work for 3 days a week, and they'd put me right at 3.5 hours a day, because at 4 hours, you're entitled to a break. So they always put me at 3.5 hours. And after 2 weeks, I got my first paycheck for 2 weeks worth of work like that. And I looked at it, and first of all, I didn't know what taxes were. Just being honest.
Right.
So, I see my gross paycheck, and then I see the money coming out, and then I see, oh man, my net paycheck was $60 after 2 weeks. And I'm like, I mow 3 lawns per week, and I make $60 in 3 hours. I just spent 369, 10.5 hours for 2 weeks. So that's 21 hours, and I made the same amount. And it clicked for me that moment. I was like, there's something not right here. If I can work this amount of hours for myself, what if I, again, I'm 15 years old. I can't really say the word extrapolated at that point, but if I extrapolated that out, what is the value add that I could actually bring in for myself as opposed to, for somebody else? And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with having a W-2 job. There's not.
Yeah.
But there is the realities that have to come along with it of what am I giving up to get security?
Right.
So any entrepreneur, when you are an entrepreneur or you are working for yourself, the biggest blessing is that you can determine what it is that you want to make. You're not bound by anybody else telling you how much you're worth.
Right.
The benefit is you get to determine that by God's grace as to how much you think you can earn based on what you're willing to put into it.
Right.
And how willing you are to fail. That's the other hard thing, because when you're a W-2 employee, if you fail, you get a slap on the wrist, but you still got a paycheck.
Right.
When you're a business owner, you fail, you can start over.
Right.
It's not a lot of fun, but there's a lot more flexibility. There's a lot more freedom. So it's what do you place more value on? And so for me, again, security driven. I like the security aspect, but I always felt that tension of, but what about what I could make potentially? All right. So then there's this donut hole. So you get into the corporate world, and
I love donuts.
I do too.
Keep talking.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
But this donut hole where, I get out of college and, I get a corporate job and I'm working in it, and I start feeling that really nice paycheck hit my accounts. I'm paying down debt. And then you kind of get to this mode where it's like, all right, your needs are taken care of, right?
Yeah.
You're not in survival mode anymore.
Yeah.
So the needs are taken care of. All right, cool. And then you get, some of your wants might start getting taken care of. And then you get to that point where you're making just enough money where you can finance everything but pay for nothing. It's a really hard spot.
Right.
Because everything's opened up to you, but you can't really afford anything unless you were to save. And if you wanted to make more money, again, that's where you're kind of at that point where like, all right, I can just work harder, maybe work my way up the corporate ladder. And, the phrase I always heard was, you can work really hard to work your way up the ladder, but then you figure out that it's leaning against the wrong wall. And, what does that mean? Well, what I'm working for wasn't really what I actually ended up wanting. It can always kind of come that way. So when I made that shift of going from employee to, self-employed, it's probably a little bit different in the way that I went about it, but, it ended up being about a 60% pay cut for me. And this is one of the first considerations is figuring out, if you're going to make that jump, who are you responsible for? What are you responsible for? Can you actually do it? And if you're not, there's a pre-stage. What did you do, Micah?
Well, I mean, you were talking about coming from I have no understanding of what it means to have like benefits and I don't know I don't understand that. I've never been in that context. There was a brief stint when I was I started in ice cream as well.
Nice.
Cold Stone Creamery.
There we go.
Was my first job.
I didn't think I knew that about you.
Yeah. My wife too. Started in ice cream. Okay. All of us, and then we were both checkers as well at different grocery stores.
That's awesome.
That one was probably the longest stint that I did at like a W-2 kind of place. Yeah. That one was they tried to get me to join the union.
Oh. Nice.
It was a union job.
Okay.
But I was doing it just on summers in between college.
Yep.
And I was like, how about I don't join the union and you still pay me? And they're like, well, just fill out the paperwork. And I was like, how about I just take too long doing the paperwork and then I have to go back to school? And they were like, okay. Because they really wanted me to join the union, but I really didn't want to join the union because the union dues and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I knew it was a temp thing, but they didn't want to let me go because I was really fast.
Got it.
Because one of the downsides of a union job is you take your sweet time because it doesn't matter because your pay structure is entirely time-based. It's not even like, are you working hard? It's 100%. You hit X number of hours, and that's when you get the pay raise. And so it breeds laziness, unfortunately. But anyway, for me, I'm like, I just 100% identify with that line from Iron Man where he says, that's how Dad did it, that's how America does it, and it's worked out pretty well so far. Like, that's how I am with, like, the entrepreneurial thing. Like, I've had people tell me, like, oh, I don't know that I could ever do my own business or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I kind of grew up this way. Like, my dad's been self-employed his entire life, and in more than one vocation. He's a professional oil painter and he's a professional architect.
Right.
And he told me, he's like, sometimes the art does better and sometimes the architecture does better. And now he's semi-retired. And the thing is, like, growing up my whole life, we never like wanted for anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like we had all the nicest stuff, but it was like, I never knew anything about, like, you know, how finances were
right.
whatever. It just was what it was, you know?
Right.
And like, as a child, you just never really understand. And, you know, I'm sure there are things that were tough for my parents or whatever, but, you know, he always told us, like, the thing that stuck with me is he's like, look, you can do, like, job wise, he's like, you do whatever you want.
Right.
That's fine. He said, the thing is you can do whatever thing that you enjoy. You just have to find somebody who will pay you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, if you like picking up garbage, there's people that will pay you to pick up garbage.
Yep.
If you like flying airplanes, there's people who will pay you to fly airplanes.
Right.
And that's the thing, is it's like, it wasn't so much like, I wouldn't call my dad like an entrepreneur. Like, I feel like that word gets a little abused.
Sure.
When it's just somebody who's like self-employed.
Yep.
But that's syntax. Anyway, he was like, look, you can like get a profession, basically just don't not do anything. But like if you have giftings and talents and abilities and um, enjoyments in life, it's like there's jobs that do that thing.
Right.
Like whatever it is, there's jobs for everything. Now the income and I restart that. Now the income potential of any of those positions
Mm-hmm.
is, limited by whatever that vocation is. But it's yeah, he was always just like, you do whatever you want, just find somebody to make that'll pay you to do it.
And I think that probably is one of the harder lessons that I remember learning, or it kind of ties into it. What I mean by that is, growing up, it was always kind of taught, or I always heard, maybe not taught, but I always heard like, all right, find something you love to do and do it. And the problem is I know basket weaving gets a really hard knock, so forgive me if you are a professional basket weaver, but if you're doing basket weaving, man, you might love it, but there might not be anybody that wants to pay you for that. Right? So the thing that I remember hearing was figure out how you want to live, and then do what allows you to have that lifestyle.
Right.
Which might mean you don't make the most amount of money.
Right.
Because time might be more valuable to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If finances are the most important thing, well, there's a caveat on that one too. I think one of the most important things I've learned since joining the wealth management practice that I did is the guy that owns a firm taught me from day one. He said, money's a tool. It's not a goal. If you have money, great, but if you see it in the wrong context, it will change your entire perspective on how you go about getting it. It'll change the why. Right? If your why is I want more of it, well, you will never have enough of it. But if the why is I want to use it for X, Y, and Z, well, now you have a tool, and a tool is as powerful as a person that knows how to use it. So that's where, kind of with the coaching aspect of where we're coming in is we're trying to help people understand, how to use a tool that's very powerful when used the right way, but can also be extremely detrimental when used the wrong way.
Yeah.
And having the right mentality a lot of times I think is critical, because if money becomes the goal, I mean, you will give up anything and everything, probably the things that are most important in life in order to achieve that goal.
Right.
As opposed to using that tool to help benefit all the different, things that really are important in life. Now, there's going to be people probably listening to this that don't agree with that.
And that's fine. Those are called haters.
But, for people that have different priorities, it just really comes back to what do you value and how do you want to add value to those around you.
Right.
So, when it comes to making the shift from, being an employee to being an employer, or being an employee to working for yourself, the blessing is we lived in the best economy probably in the world.
Yeah.
In the best environment in the world to do that. And even to fail forward in that is because you can have a part-time job for yourself in building up an asset for yourself while you have the platform of your job. Because your job is going to provide you the initial security before you can make that leap. The hard part is not starting something else. The hard part is figuring out, when do I transition more full-time?
Right.
That's a hard one, because to your point, if you're used to having benefits and a 401k, if you're used to having health insurance, I mean, you can still have health insurance, don't get me wrong. There's ways to figure all this stuff out. But what I'm saying is if you're used to that, if you're used to all that kind of stuff, and then you try and transition into being self-employed just immediately, and you don't have all the resources and things in place to know how to do that, man, it's a scary place to be. I remember, I think, I went without health insurance for a little bit. I mean, I still had, like cost sharing stuff, but just trying to figure out, man, how do I reduce my expenses in some of these areas? Because I used to have great benefits. Like, I used to have a dental plan, and then I put off getting my teeth cleaned because I took it for granted.
To that, on that track, I just want to tell you this like entrepreneurial story of just like how life works.
Yeah.
When you are on the backside of that, because I remember I grew up this way, right?
Right.
First time I broke my arm, okay, we didn't have health insurance.
Right.
My dad traded the doctor artwork.
Wow.
To fix my arm.
Wow.
But you can't be can't have anesthesia if you don't have insurance, because obviously the risk of dying is pretty good. If you don't have
Shoot.
Yeah, because of anesthesia, get it wrong and that's it. But anyway, so They reset my arm while I was awake.
Oh man. So lesson from here is I feel like it can sometimes be painful to be self-employed.
I just remember screaming, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I remember.
Oh man, I would have blacked out from the pain, I'm sure.
I probably did. I just don't remember it.
Jeez.
But it's not for the faint of heart, but it will make you tough.
Right.
But anyway, the whole entrepreneurial thing, and I'm glad you mentioned talking about like backing into the lifestyle, because I think that's really the key, because especially in the creative industries,
Yeah.
that's where things are really difficult. If you sell a thing, it's usually pretty easy. You can talk about markups, and
Yep.
you need to make X amount to be able to fund spending another one, and so on and so forth. But
Right.
services is usually where people get really hung up
Mm-hmm.
because of, like you said, the value proposition.
Right.
I'll tell you right now, one thing that really helped me figure out the whole, like, I don't need to be afraid to ask people for money
Right.
anymore is I had an issue with my toilet,
Yep.
right? And I had a plumber come, and he fixed it, and it was like a couple of screw turns or whatever. And, the service calls, $75,
Yeah.
$100. And I was like, it's like Home Alone. I'm not afraid anymore. Like,
Right.
that's really where you need to get to in the creative industry, is like realize you're part of the other, like, you're just like any other service-based
Right.
industry. And if you have the knowledge and information, because that's what people are paying for.
Yep.
Like, you could go on YouTube and figure out how to fix a toilet,
Mhm.
but I know what happens if you get it wrong. You have a worse problem. So
Right.
you're paying for the knowledge, the experience, the expertise in any, whether it's plumbing or financial planning.
Right.
And that's where, like, the creative industry needs to come too. But I appreciate you saying about backing into that, because I think that's really the key to figuring that out.
Mhm.
Is what do you need to make
Mhm.
to exist?
Yep.
And that's going to be different if you're like a solo guy that's
Mhm.
has 6 roommates, or you're living in your parents' basement.
100%.
And that's going to be different if
Yep.
you're married, or if you're married with kids, or if you're married with multiple kids, or
Yep.
whatever. Like, that number is going to be different.
Yep.
Even though you might be technically creating the same thing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And that's another whole nother story with, like, creative professionalism and how to determine where you are in that market, in that bracket. But
Yep.
if you have the knowledge and experience and expertise, then there's no reason that you can't figure out a reasonable income, a reasonable rate in pretty much any
Yeah.
market.
And I think too, people are afraid, I think, to pay cheaper prices a lot of times. Like, I think a lot of times they want cheaper prices, but at the same time, there's always that little nagging thing in the back of their mind, like, what am I getting for that price?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, for example, if I pay you, or if I receive a quote back from, well, I'll use this as an example. There's a guy that I know that owns a landscaping company,
Mhm.
and they're not the cheapest ones out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing bids, and they were encouraged from the start, like, hey, price yourself the right way from the start. You'll get people saying no,
Mhm.
and that's okay. But the people that say yes, they'll understand and appreciate the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember they had a quote that they had put out there, and it was, more expensive than every other company that quoted. And they ended up getting the bid simply because their quote, they valued themselves the right way,
Mhm.
which communicated confidence to the person that they
Mhm.
quoted. And that person appreciated that fact, and they figured, all right, if you're willing to charge me this much, then I should be able to expect this level of service.
Yeah.
There's a big deal there. And I mean, I think if, when we started doing financial coaching, we charged, it's embarrassing to say now, but $25 an hour. It seemed like a pretty good amount to charge for an hour. Because if you think, again, going
Don't
back.
you get $25 at McDonald's now? $25 an hour?
All right, look, bro.
Inflation?
You might at this point, but
Thanks, Obama.
gosh, like when you go to, when I had my corporate job, I think I was making $30-some an hour. So, for me to say, like, oh yeah, I'm going to charge $25 an hour for financial coaching, it seemed pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Right? Now, granted, I'm not doing coaching 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but I was like, yeah, it sounded pretty good. Until we started getting more and more into it.
Mhm.
And then, you figure out the value that you're actually able to provide through your services.
Mhm.
So, for you, that's going to be a different value proposition than
Right.
what it is for me. But at the end of the day, we started realizing, man, the amount of money or the amount of, time or whatever it is that we're able to help people save for that conversion of like converting their time to money or, helping maximize people's wealth worth way more than $25 an hour.
Right.
But it was still that moment where we determined, all right, what price do we want to ask? And we came to the conclusion $200 an hour is fair.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember the first time we sat down with a business owner and we quoted them $200 an hour. And it's that moment like you're like $200 an hour? Like you kind of have that like question mark in the back of your voice. And then they don't flinch and they're like, yeah, okay, no problem, let's do it.
And then you go, dang, I should ask for more.
But it's that moment that you talked about earlier where it's like, all right, I finally realize I can ask what I think I'm worth. But sometimes you don't know how to know what you're worth.
Right.
And that's, I think, the whole thing that we're trying to figure out. So, if you're making that shift, like if you're working for somebody full time as your W-2 employee, your needs from your business is not going to be nearly as great.
Right.
Right. So it might allow you to capture market share with, getting your name out there, doing some things for a discounted rate. But if you're full time in your business, then it is back in. All right. Number one thing is, do you know your numbers? Right? Do you know your living expenses? Do you know how much it costs you on a month-to-month from a cash flow perspective to live? You have money coming in and money going out. What's the variance there? So how much do you need coming in order to offset not just your month-to-months, but also like what I call the ghost expenses? For example, the life insurance policies that you might have that are, once a year that hit, or, your tire pops, or you need new tires on your vehicle maintenance in general. That's a big one, especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're a business owner, small business owner. You're traveling all over the place a lot of times to do whatever you need to do. So what are those unconsidered expenses that, will more than likely happen that you need to start planning for? There's a big difference too, by the way, if you're renting in an apartment or something like that versus if you're a homeowner.
Right.
Because when you're a homeowner, it's not just your mortgage payment that you're worrying about. Now you got, man, what happens if, your roof needs to be replaced? What happens if your hot water heater shuts down? What happens if, your lawnmower, like what happened to me, where I forgot to change the oil and your engine blows? All right, that's super embarrassing, but it happens, right? What happens? Like, how do you fund that? So it's building in margin.
Right.
And then on top of that, this is where having professional partners is, in my opinion, really helpful. Is because, if I said just blatantly or flat, not blatantly, but just flat, all right, I know I need $50,000 to support my lifestyle in a year, right? Okay. Well, is that really what I need to make from my business in order to survive?
Not if you want to survive and pay the government at the same time.
Right. So it's thinking through some of those different caveats. Like when you work for an employer, you don't really have a whole lot of opportunities to maximize wealth through, tax savings or things like that. But this is where having a great CPA can be super helpful when you start going the more self-employed route. Is number one, understanding what's available to you now, because it's a whole new world with regards to taxes and a whole new world with regards to how you can spend money in a way that can benefit your business and benefit your overall tax situation.
Yeah.
And that's where I highly recommend having a great CPA. If you don't have one, find one or give us a call and we'll help you find one. But that is going to be one of the most critical things, is because the amount of money that you make, then it's a moving target based on how well you understand the tax consequences of your decisions.
Right.
It just is. And what's available to you because of that.
Right.
So that's where, again, finding somebody that can come alongside you, if that's not your primary thing you think about, because what we found is a lot of people that own small businesses, right, especially in the creative space, it's easier to focus on, here's what I need to do to grow my business. And with any problems that come up, what I'll do is I'll just outgrow my problems.
Right.
Instead of, how do I maximize where I'm at right now? And that'll help me move out of my problems. Like I can fix my problems. I can become more efficient with my overall situation. I can make certain decisions that help maximize my profitability now. And that allows me to actually grow and scale more effectively.
Right.
But again, if your mind is so wrapped up in just the growth aspect, that's where it can be crucial to have professional partners that help you think a little bit differently. Yeah. Or add that value to you. So
I wish I had the CPA I had now, like when I started like 6 years ago. That would have been great. It's just it's one of the biggest things is like understanding that like you said, it's having the people that in your lane, in your corner, that know what you don't and can help you navigate those things, so you don't end up with a problem, that you don't end up with the surprise you owe the government 10 grand.
Right.
You know, that's the other thing that, like, on like you're talking surprise expenses. That's a big thing that people that start to transition into the self-employed world, like, don't realize or don't notice right off the bat, and they get into trouble doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, the biggest thing is just thinking about, like you said, it's backing into the numbers. And one of the things that helped me with, like, not freaking out exit strategy transition wise was realizing just kind of how small that number actually was. Like, here's what I need living expenses, and then you break that down into clients. You go, I only need like 10.
Right.
Like 10 people. That's not very many. Like, that's not a lot. And then you start looking, like you said, growth potential, where you go, I need 10. If I have 15, it's like, oh, I'm making bank. You know what I mean?
Right. So, like, I'll use my firm because I know, again, our numbers pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so for example, if I'm thinking about like a financial plan or financial coaching,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm charging $200 an hour for coaching,
Mm-hmm.
right? All right, so $200 an hour. How many coaching clients would I need to have an income that would be sustainable? So, you know, I know what my expenses are. If I know my numbers, I can back into then, all right, how much do I need net on a month-to-month basis in order to make this happen? So what do I need to charge in order to accomplish the gross number to that then allows me to back into my net number?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, if I'll just use estimated numbers. All right, let's say I want to make $5,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So $5,000 a month, then if I need to charge, or how many clients do I need at $200 an hour?
Dude, it's 25, right?
25 coaching clients. If that's what I did full time. Now, that's not what I do full time. But if that's what I do full time, then I need 25 clients a month. Right. And so 25 clients, that's 25 hours.
Right.
Of me doing that.
And that's pretty comparable to the for a lot of people that, at least in our market, when you're talking about executive portraits, headshots, that's in that zone. Like, roughly, that's about the going rate. Like I said, in our kind of target geographic area, that's about average. And you think about it that way, and you go, yeah, that's not very many. Like, as far as like,
and this
earning an income,
right? And this is where it's interesting because, you know, again, I can, if I'm doing financial coaching, well, now I'm still running into that same the same thing where I'm trading time for money.
Right.
Right. And if I've got 25 hours, well, I still have 3.5 weeks worth of time that I could technically go out and do if I'm charging $200 an hour, right, to sustain my lifestyle. So that's where it comes back to, all right, well, where else can I invest my time for potentially greater return on my time? Because my time, like, as your business grows, your time becomes more valuable a lot of times than the income, because again, people are paying you now not for your time, they're paying you for what you know. And let me ask you this: how many times I heard this was Dr. MacArthur, I saw this in something recently. He said, like, you know, nobody pays a premium for ignorance. So, like, you know,
sounds like a bumper sticker.
So, like, you know, if you're not ignorant and you do have an expertise and you are a growing expert in your field, then the value of your services continues to rise. You know, so how much can you charge then based off your expertise? Because it doesn't really come back to time anymore. And that's where, you know, being self-employed opens up this big opportunity for freedom and flexibility. The hard part is do you get too comfortable with the freedom and the flexibility? Because it can become easy to kind of just be, all right, I'm making just enough to get by. I've got my time now, and you know, I've seen that happen to some business owners in the past where I'm making some money, but I really like my freedom now.
Right.
But now it's coming at an expense to potentially my family, or it's coming at an expense to, you know, my business growth because I haven't been growing it, like, whatever it may be. But I don't know, what have you found in that?
Well, I mean, it's one thing. We're going to have to wrap this up soon.
That's fine.
But
did we get through everything you wanted to?
Yeah, we did.
To kind of talk through.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's been more like on the entrepreneurial side of things is yes, understanding the expertise size of it. There's this thing that happens a lot in our industry, unfortunately, is this fake it till you make it attitude. that is wrapped in what's that called when you're like when you're like lying to yourself? What's that called? Conceit.
Sure.
But there's like there's people that like they jump to that level too quickly.
Right.
Of like, oh well, like I know stuff, or worse, the fake it till you make it attitude because of YouTube University.
Right.
Is like they will say, oh, I know how to do this, and or they can turn a good looking product.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times the things that like so let's say creative A and creative B. Creative A is faking it until he makes it. Creative B has the knowledge and experience and expertise going into it. And it's not always necessarily like, I've been in the industry 20 years or 50 years, like whatever. It's not necessarily tied to that.
Right.
It's tied to that value proposition for the client, because what happens is somebody who doesn't have, like, hasn't gone through a lot of like client work and like understands all the business sides of it, what they'll do is they'll turn a quality looking product, but what happens is the back end is a mess. But the client never knows that because they never see that part of it. So the client, as long as you can give them what they want,
yeah,
they don't really, it never really affects them. Whereas they might be charging the same, but the person faking it until they make it over here, they're riding this like crazy knife edge of, like, for example, you take one aspect of our industry, which is archival and backup. And there's guys that they will, like, they keep the job on a hard drive and then they'll like delete it after like 6 months or whatever.
Sure.
To like save space.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you just totally, like, in one keystroke, you consciously destroyed your potential to make more money off that client. To like say, hey, remember all that other stuff that we have with you? Why don't we turn that into more content for you? Why don't we repurpose that for you? Like, they just obliterate the upsell because they're like, oh, well, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, but what does it look like when that client does come to you out of the blue and says, hey, do you have X?
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, it's right here.
Right.
Like, how like superhero do you look when they go,
right.
oh, surely they're not going to have this thing hanging out? But
yeah.
you have gone above and beyond to be able to protect your client from themselves or something. They didn't even like realize that was a thing.
Yeah.
But it's those things you look back and you go, man, I wish I would have had, because nobody likes to lose data ever.
Right.
But to do it consciously, I'm like, no. But they're like, oh, hard drives are expensive. And I was like, welcome to business. Like, everything's expensive. So what are you going to do? You're going to choose the short game and
right.
how much money you're going to put out? Or are you going to choose the long game in protecting your interests
right.
and your clients for now and into the future?
Yeah. And I feel like there's, again, that's part of the expertise in that learning curve. Because, I mean, again, there's things when I first got into my industry that, I've dramatically been able to improve since the time I got started. Same thing, I'm sure, with you. And, it's that cost benefit analysis of, all right, where do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to focus my time? But that's a hard question too, like along all these lines of, is what it would take for me to survive.
Right.
Is it even worth it to somebody else? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like, for example, you could have the best product, you could have the best service in photography. Like, I don't know, taking pictures of ants. I don't know if that's a thing. It might be a thing. It might be a thing, right? But how many people, like, you could be really good at it, but if you were to do that whole calculation of, all right, here's what I need to live on per month, and if I say I charge $100 per photo, can I find whatever that math is, 50 people that want to buy ant photos per month?
No, you just find one, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Scientific research study or like Nat Geo.
Right.
You just need to find one, Discovery, Animal Planet.
And see, exactly.
You have to niche out at that point.
Right. And there is probably a lot of benefit too, by the way, in niching. Like, if you can go into a niche, for example, if I'm a financial advisor for everybody versus if I'm a financial advisor for a very select group of people, I'll figure out how to be an expert in that one area.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, long term, it probably ends up, again, that's a long game, right?
Yeah.
Versus the short term game. So there's all these different caveats of just trying to figure out how to build a business. And again, I think that's 100% we're getting connected with a professional partner of some sort helps you identify what's the best use of my time as I'm going about this. Especially as you're going down that journey of like, all right, I'm still working for somebody else, but I want to start something part-time. All right, having that knowledge on the front end before you take the leap, you know, again, some people are able to do that and do it well. I'm probably not one of those guys. I knew my numbers. I knew if I could survive on 60% less than what I was making at the time, right? But other people, it kind of is like a burn the ships moment where I'm like, all right, well, I got to make this work. Otherwise, I'm done.
Right.
But the good news is when you move into self-employment world, I think the really nice aspect of it is you start getting experience that you can apply towards any job.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
And there's an ownership level that's there that probably is not as evident anymore.
Right.
You know, in the working world. So, long story short,
know your numbers.
Know your numbers. If you know your numbers, it allows you to make decisions with knowledge. When you make decisions with knowledge, it gives you a lot more confidence to be able to move in that direction. If you don't know your numbers, find somebody that can help you. Understanding even your profit margins, understanding, because in your business, I think it's more than just your time that you're giving. You're like, it's the expertise, but it's also there's aspects of different products that you can offer, right? What's your margins for those types of things? Because that's gonna be what you're actually making on the back end of your job, but that's still your gross profit. Like that's not backing into like, all right, what I actually still need for living expenses, and that's where it's a challenge to be a business owner, but it's also a highly rewarding venture when done the right way. So
5 stars, would recommend. But that's it for this. Thanks for coming on the show. That will remain nameless.
I was about to say, like, what's it called?
We don't know. It depends on how well it goes. I'll give it a name. I'll give it a name in 2024 if it makes
the Micah Brown Media Podcast.
Yeah. See,
Videocast.
That doesn't work.
Why doesn't that work?
It's just like
What?
I don't know.
I like it.
I'll figure it out.
All right.
I'll figure it out.